It brings me great pleasure to introduce Hessie Jones. I told a few people that Hessie was speaking, and they were really pleased. And people said, oh, yes, I read Hessie's work quite a bit. And so you're definitely making an impact out there, Hessie, with your work. Let me spotlight you there. So thank you so much for coming, spending a bit of time with us. Seasoned digital strategist, privacy technologist, continues to challenge the notion of complacency. She advocates for data rights and sovereignty, human-centered AI through ethical distribution strategies. And Hessie sees the rise of decentralization as being a catalyst that will transform every facet of society and industry. 20-year journey, she's ventured startups in privacy, security, data targeting, behavior and ID profiling, in MarTech. She's got experience in advertising, banking, digital technology. Current focus is on data privacy, identity and sovereignty, and ethical AI. I kind of wondering if the speakers on these panels today started work at about 6 years old. Everybody seems to have done so much in their career so far, present company excluded, obviously, but everybody who's on the main stage tonight. Hessie, great to see you.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be here, Richard. Thank you.
So we're on the 17:55 on the clock, so we're doing okay for time. I know Sylvie's keen to come and speak to us after you. So if we could run for about 18 or so minutes with you, is that okay?
Yeah, okay. I'll do the best I can.
Wonderful.
Okay, so I'm going to take you guys through a little bit of a journey, me as a marketer throughout my career. And truth be told, Richard, the reason I've done a lot is because I'm a lot older than you are. So anyway, okay, so I'm a marketer. My job is actually to find the right customers for products and services that a company makes. I've been doing this for about 20 years, and I started because of data. I used to sell migraine medications, tacos, pizzas, credit cards, media properties, platforms, and then most recently, behavioral technology, AI, and privacy, all because of data. So the goal of business is to sell people stuff. The more you buy, the company tries to sell you a lot more. The more you tell people about it, the more a company wants to reward you. So there's this perpetual cycle that continues to find people just like you. Over time, data has become increasingly valuable, and today it's pretty much everywhere. The more that people put themselves online, their conversations, their behaviors, now instrumenting their bodies, their cars, their homes, the more people like me actually love that stuff. Recently in Twitter, I actually saw this. Data is not the new oil. Data is actually the new glitter. It lures humans in with its shininess. It's very easy to accumulate. It's found in places you least likely to find it. And it's almost impossible to get rid of. But more importantly, everyone insists on using it without thinking about the consequences. So for me as a data marketer, it started out as a guessing game. So we developed a brand, we created a market who we thought would consume the product. And through TV ratings, impressions, we started to correlate these things to purchase. We had an idea where things were being bought. But more importantly, over time, we were able to discern things like household demographics, income, and location. So what were we trying to do? We were actually trying to figure out more about our audience, somehow get into their heads and really try to understand what makes them tick and find that ideal customer that would be our most profitable one. So we look to establish processes like the buying funnel to understand a consumer's path to purchase. This is the idea called customer centricity, and it was at play. It's been at play for many years to figure out what makes people tick, what their wants are, what their needs are, what their propensities, and the ultimate goal was really to predict what they would do. So when digital came along, we started to make these associations with this buying funnel because we had so much more information. We had sites that people would go to. We could get their location information, where they lived, where they worked, where they checked in. At an aggregate level, we started to also collect information about their search activities, but mainly to understand how they were searching for our products. And then when social came along, it gave us this treasure trove of information. And people were spilling their lives online. There were rampant threads of conversations about anything and everything. And what I realized in my research was that there's this enormous trust within these tightly knit forums where people would let down their guard and be transparent about their views on many topics. This vulnerability and this honesty actually got people like me even more hungry to correlate this notion of intent with motivation, and then eventually with what their purchase activity would be. So I was part of an ad platform. I'm sure you all know of Yahoo, but we're being measured and compensated through our performance on three things: reach, revenue, and engagement. Engagement was the most important metric. How could we keep people on our site longer? It was very important because the longer you kept them in there, the more impressions that people generate, hence the more ad inventory that we could sell, hence the more revenue opportunities that we could garner. So I thought that if we had this whole picture of the customer, from their social profile to their online behaviors to their business transactions, then we could actually stop guessing. So it was innocuous at first, but over time it actually became much more insidious. And I'm not sure if any of you have watched The Social Dilemma. It's like number 6 on Netflix these days. But that same metric of engagement for which we were compensated for has not changed to this very day. And Brian Solis, who is a futurist and writes about the future economy, said this, and I thought it was prescient. We now live 3 lives online, which we will continue to do in the future. One that disappears, one that's secret, and one that will sculpt our legacy. So after 20 years of my data marketing experience, I now consider myself an anti-marketer. I realized that we're crossing a very dangerous line. And I started to question whether or not business actually needs all that data to make all these sound decisions. Absolutely not. The issue is that technology has created what we consider today a standard for how information is used, how it's collected, how it's managed. And unfortunately, policy and regulation continue to lag in the background, slow to keep up with any of these technological changes. So now let's get into the topic of education surveillance. COVID has been the catalyst to actually accelerate the pace to move everything and everyone online. Everybody knows that. It's now that the risks to children are starting to really surface. And this legally is the most sensitive data that's out there. I'm going to reference a few stats that I gleaned from a recent presentation with Shoshana Zuboff, who everybody knows is the author of Surveillance Capitalism. She said, prior to COVID, Google Classroom was the most prominent tech provider from K to 12. March of this year, Google Classroom doubled its active users to almost 100 million. Google Meet, which is its video product, was used 25 times more than in January 2020 of this year. G Suite, which is Google Educate, which is their paid part of the platform, is now up 33% to 120 million from a year ago. What's ironic about this is that February 2020, the Attorney General in New Mexico actually launched a lawsuit against Google Educate for allegedly collecting personal data from students, data mining websites, search, YouTube, video chat history, surreptitiously actually extracting various pieces of personal information for ad purposes. So what's also happening is that there's a rise in investment of facial recognition software in many of the US schools. I believe last year, $2.7 billion was spent from education towards facial recognition technology because of the school shootings. So we know that these AI-supported facial recognition software poses a few risks that are not safe for children because of their accuracy and also the inability to actually detect darker skin color. And so from that perspective, what we're also finding in a lot of schools is that a lot of this data is stored locally. So now there's a security vulnerability. So while it's there to also protect children, in many cases, it's actually been used as surveillance mechanisms against the very students it's actually supposed to protect. on the platform themselves, we're starting to see emerging dangers in software that's used to positively shape behavior of students, track emotions, behavior management tools to record students' feelings, for example. Education, they're using keystroke capturing software, filtering technology, webcams to keep an eye on children to protect them against cases of sexting, for example, or cyberbullying. So recently, I actually did a research study in the state of education surveillance here in Ontario, Canada. I did it with Smart Species Open Consent Group, ID Machines in Support of Technology for Good. And we tracked actually 21 education applications and platforms that were deployed in primary, middle, and high school. And we audited them for against Canada's privacy laws. The Personal Information Protection and Education Documents Act, specifically for meaningful consent. And for those that don't know what meaningful consent is, it essentially states that a person who is consenting to the collection or use or disclosure of their personal information has a solid understanding of all the risks before they actually decide to hand over their data, which is not normally the case. What we found is that when we audited all these technologies is that all of them failed to comply with meaningful consent requirements. We also audited for the existence of the ad trackers on the websites, as well as any of the advertising tags. And none of the technologies failed to disclose this important information. It was apparent in the failure to provide even satisfactory information regarding data protection policies and secure information when a student's information goes from a platform to a server. So what we also found was that a lot of the ed tech companies, they're American, so they're outside of the Canadian jurisdiction. Their privacy policies don't even provide the necessary protections for children who are not American. So in Ontario, our laws don't even extend to third-party application that resides on the platform. So this is a critical risk to the state of children's data, especially when it doesn't address the collection of thousands of applications that are used by these educators every day. So what we found was that we have a fragmented system in our education sector. Data is not securely audited. Ed tech applications are not satisfactorily vetted. Cybersecurity policies are inconsistently applied across all schools. And this poses the greater risk of the student information from a security perspective. The conclusion is that we have an education sector. It leaves kids much more exposed, parents largely unaware, teachers are pressed to deliver a lot of their curriculums without really understanding the impacts of the technology. And then you have your IT administrators that are stretched to deliver a lot of their services at the expense of a lot of these policy mandates. So I think the larger question is who owns the data? So there are custodians of your data, your banks, your healthcare institutions. They contend that they own your data and they're required to keep your data safe. But arguably that notion is challenged. But I would also say that organizations are really, really hard pressed to give up control, because for business, what's at stake is how will it affect my decisions? Can I still remain profitable? Can advertisers actually change a lot of their practices and still be able to target effectively? This goes to the heart of how a business actually performs and ultimately how it survives. But one media VP, who is a friend of mine who works at Walmart Media, said that people actually want better experiences, but they're going to demand a lot more privacy from the outset. From his perspective, he said that business can thrive within this new reality where consumers actually want more transparency and more data control. So what does that mean? Where do we move from? We move from customer centricity to now a human-centric environment. It means moving from a practice where we collect anything and everything to profile, predict what customers will do, to an environment where we call what we call human-centricity. That we give people the tools, the authority to assert their right to self-determination when it comes to their data. And it has to be fostered within an environment that caters to this principle. So what does this mean? So I actually co-founded MyData Canada, part of the global MyData network recently. And our group actually responded to a call for public consultation for privacy law reform for the public sector, for the private sector. And we proposed the recommendations. What we realized is that laws alone can't fix this. We need actually two sides. We need the promotion of privacy preserving, a free flow of data across borders, which means that we have to harmonize a lot of these data privacy, data protection and privacy policy standards across borders to a standard that could start with GDPR. We also need technology-aware digital ecosystems that have to be supported through regulation. It has to make it easy for business to adopt, but also make it easy for consumers to be educated and to be aware of these. The idea is to empower individuals while it also enabling what we call responsible data sharing. So it also has to be comprehensive. So a lot of the problems that are happening today when it comes to data justice, bias in algorithms, those have to be accounted for too. And that means creating algorithmic impact assessments to establish clear guidelines so that companies can provide fair explanation of their algorithms while we're also protecting their trade secrets. We also have to prioritize children's privacy as a means of keeping children safe, but we have to also look to the future because we know that children have to be able to thrive within this environment. And that means requiring policies to vet any of these education technologies as much as possible, going to best practices and avoiding free or discounted technology that are subsidized by this notion of free. So emphasize also the control of information as well as positive consent, and that the user is at the center of this decision. All the procurement activities have to be extended to third parties across jurisdictions as well. One thing that I'm really happy about is that this idea of data portability is now becoming sort of a reality in the use of verifiable credentials or through self-sovereign identity. We have to continue to encourage investment in these innovation areas to ensure a lot of these responsible data practices. And we have to give businesses the tools to meet their objectives while actually respecting Canada's consent by design culture. And this is where we are. Make no mistake, the laws need to have teeth, but they also need to be enforced. But if government doesn't invest and enable an ecosystem to make this possible, things aren't going to change. I had a talk with a friend of mine who used to be the global head of data and AI at a big agency called Publicis Sapient, and he said, data is clearly one of the most valuable assets in the world today, especially with the growing importance of AI, which relies on massive amounts of data. Data privacy needs to be incorporated into the fabric of these technologies to work for society to get the benefits out of AI. To me, data privacy means having the ability to control what and why data is used, and not the ability to actually keep it secret, which is actually far easier. So for that to happen, there needs to be an open and a transparent marketplace where people and companies can sell data that they create, as well as a consistent set of regulations for how companies can use data. So it's going to take a while. There's a lot of parties at play that need to coordinate and need to get into the same page. What this is really about is doing what's right for the people, for the population. Means we have to change our mindsets for innovation and create more sustainable and more profitable outcomes. And this is more important now than ever. And that's it.
Wow.
Thank you for giving me that opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Let me just remove the spotlight and we can have our heavenly body from above.
Thanks, Richard. I think Hessie has given such a good talk, and how she has moved on from, customer centricity to human centricity. This is so important that we are just letting our data being available so much to businesses, and we are letting our own guard down. But it's so important to have the transparency, the privacy around it, and the ethical part and the regulations that need to be driven around it. And I think your research is something that might interest a few people, which people can connect to you maybe later about how it is being used in the education sector. And children's data is so sensitive. I agree to you, because I'm a mother and I understand how data can be used in another ways, knowing so much about AI. And yes, AI is the new glitter. I definitely agree to that one. And thank you, Hessie, for such a wonderful talk. Richard, I'll let you introduce the next speaker. Thank you.